Tonight, you'll hear 11 true horror stories, first-hand accounts from people who lived through the kind of nightmares most of us only imagine. These aren't stories with happy endings. They're raw, disturbing, and unforgettable. From haunted houses to chilling encounters deep in the woods, each tale will pull you deeper into the shadows. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and listen closely. Because the scariest thing is knowing that every word you're about to hear actually happened. In my room felt heavy that night, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. 9 years ago, I was just a teenager, curled up in my bed, the world outside my window, a blur of springtime shadows. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, her words about the dead giving signs before they leave forever. She'd sit by the fire, her eyes gleaming with stories of spirits and omens, her voice low and insistent. Katerina, she'd say, when someone you love is about to go, they'll find a way to say goodbye. A whisper, a touch, a shadow in the dark. I'd laugh it off, rolling my eyes at her superstitions. Science was my anchor, cold, hard facts that left no room for ghosts. But that night, something shifted. The air wasn't just heavy, it was wrong. My sister, Clementina, was my everything. She wasn't just a sister. She was my confidant, my mirror, my best friend. Her laugh could light up a room, her kindness, a warmth I leaned into. She was on a trip with her friends that weekend, a carefree getaway to the coast, while our parents were at our cousin's birthday party. I was alone in the house, a rare solitude I cherished. I cooked noodles, the steam curling up like ghosts in the dim kitchen light, and settled in to watch my favorite movie. The flickering screen lulled me into a drowsy haze, and by midnight, my eyelids were heavy. I dragged myself to bed, the house creaking softly as it settled into the night. As I sank into sleep, the world felt safe, familiar. But then, something stirred. A faint hum, like a melody, caught on the wind, tugged at my senses. It was my favorite lullaby, the one Clementina used to tease me about, saying it was for babies. I smiled in the dark, half asleep, thinking she must have come home early. But the humming grew louder, more insistent, weaving through the silence like a thread pulling tighter. My room felt colder, the air pressing against my skin, and I opened my eyes to a darkness so thick it seemed to pulse. Listen closely, Katerina. The melody wasn't comforting anymore. It was sharp, jagged, like a song sung through clenched teeth. I called out, Clementina. My voice trembled, swallowed by the void. No answer. Just the hum, relentless, curling around me like smoke. I lay still, my heart thudding against my ribs. The room felt alive, watching me. I told myself it was a dream, that I was imagining things. But the cold deepened, sinking into my bones, and the humming didn't stop. It was her voice, I was sure of it, but it wasn't right. It was hollow, like an echo from somewhere far away, somewhere I didn't want to imagine. Feel the chill, Katerina. It's real. I pulled the blanket tighter, my breath shallow, waiting for the sound to fade. But it didn't. It grew, filling the room, until I couldn't tell where the song ended and the silence began. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body felt anchored to the bed, trapped in the weight of that unnatural cold. The darkness wasn't just absence of light. It was a presence, heavy and watchful, pressing against my skin. I lay frozen, the lullaby still ringing in my ears, each note a needle pricking my nerves. Then I felt it, a gentle touch, fingers brushing through my hair, soft but deliberate. My heart stopped. It was Clementina's touch, the way she'd soothe me when I was younger. But now, it felt wrong, like a memory twisted into something sinister. Clementina, I whispered again, my voice barely a breath. The stroking continued slow and rhythmic, but she didn't answer. The silence between the notes was deafening, a void that swallowed my courage. I strained my eyes in the dark, trying to make out her shape. The faint outline of a figure found at the edge of my bed, shrouded in shadow. It was her. I knew it was, but the air around her felt heavy, like it was holding something unnatural. Look closer, Katerina. See what's there. Her hand moved through my hair, cold as ice, each touch sending shivers down my spine. The lullaby grew softer, but not comforting. It was eerie, a melody sung by someone who wasn't entirely there. I tried to move to sit up, to push her away, but my body betrayed me. My limbs were lead, my fingers numb, as if the cold had seeped into my very soul. Clementina, why are you here? I managed my voice, cracking. The stroking stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the song. Then her voice came low and hollow, like it was carried on a wind from somewhere else. I'll miss you in heaven, Katerina. The words sliced through me, sharp and final. My breath caught my chest tightening, as if the air itself had turned against me. The figure stood its silhouette, blending into the darkness, and moved toward the door. I wanted to scream, to beg her to stay, to explain. But my voice was gone, stolen, by the fear that gripped me. The room grew colder still, the air thick, with a presence I couldn't name. As the figure vanished, I lay there paralyzed, my mind racing. Was she drunk, sleepwalking? Or was it something else? Something my grandmother's stories had warned me about? Feel the truth, Katerina. It's not a dream. The cold lingered, a reminder of her touch, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been visited by something more than my sister. The darkness seemed to watch me, its silence heavy with secrets. I stayed awake until dawn, too afraid to close my eyes, too afraid to face what might be waiting in the shadows. Morning broke, but the light didn't chase away the dread. I stumbled out of bed, my body heavy with exhaustion and fear. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's hiding something. I found my parents in the living room, their faces pale, their eyes red with tears. My mother's voice broke as she spoke each word, a hammer to my heart. Your sister, she's gone. A car accident last night. The world tilted the room spinning as her words sank in. Clementina, my bright, beautiful sister, was dead. I stood there, frozen, as grief and shock crashed over me like a wave pulling me under. Then it hit me. The memory of last night, her cold touch, her eerie voice. I'll miss you in heaven. My grandmother's words came rushing back, her stories of signs from the dead. Had Clementina come to me one last time to say goodbye? Or was it something else, something darker wearing her face? Ask yourself, Katerina, what did you see? My mind churned with questions, each one sharper than the last. Why had her voice sounded so dulled, so unlike her? Why had the room felt so wrong? I wanted to believe it was her, that she'd reached out to me in her final moments. But the memory of that touch, that song, felt like a violation, a shadow of the sister I loved. 9 years have passed, but the weight of that night hasn't lifted. I sit here writing this, and the grief is still raw, a wound that never heals. Clementina's absence is a hole in my life, but it's the questions that haunt me most. Was it really her giving me a sign? Or was my mind playing tricks, twisting my fear into something real? Feel the doubt, Katerina. It's part of you now. Sometimes, late at night, I hear that lullaby again, faint and distant, carried on the wind. I don't know if it's her or if it's just me, clinging to the memory of a sister I'll never see again. But one thing I know, that night changed me. It taught me that the line between the living and the dead is thinner than I ever imagined, and some goodbyes are heavier than others. I glanced at the stained glass windows, their colors fracturing the sunlight into shards of red and gold. The image of Saint Michael slaying the demon seemed to pulse as if the glass itself were alive, warning me of something I couldn't yet see. I shook it off, blaming the heat, the lack of sleep, the way my mind sometimes spun stories out of nothing. But the unease grew a cold knot tightening in my chest. Something's wrong. You know it. Anna and her friends had decided to take a different route to church that morning, a winding path through the outskirts of town, where the houses thinned and the jungle crept closer to the road. It was Clara's idea, a whim, to avoid the crowded main streets and enjoy the quiet of the back roads. Anna had mentioned it casually the night before, her voice bright with excitement over the phone. "It'll be fun," she'd said, "a little adventure." I hadn't thought much of it then, but now standing in the church, those words echoed like a warning. The sermon ended, and the congregation spilled outside, voices rising in cheerful chatter. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. My fingers hovered over Anna's contact, hesitating. Call her. Now. But before I could, my phone buzzed a single message lighting up the screen. "We're okay, but something happened. Meet us outside." My heart lurched. The words were too vague, too heavy with unspoken dread. I pushed through the crowd, my pulse hammering, and stepped into the blinding sunlight. Anna Clara, Julia, and Mariana were waiting by the church gate, their faces pale, eyes wide, with a fear I'd never seen in them before. Anna's hands trembled as she reached for me, her fingers cold despite the heat. "We saw something," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Something awful." They told me the story in fragments, their voices overlapping each one, picking up where the other faltered. It began on that quiet back road, where the jungle pressed close, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and decay. They were driving Clara's old Fiat, the radio playing a faint pop song, when they noticed a pickup truck parked crookedly on the side of the road. 3 men stood around it, their movements sharp and purposeful. At first, Anna thought they were fixing a flat tire or arguing over directions. But then she saw him, a man frail and ragged, his clothes torn, his body smeared with blood. He wasn't standing. He was being dragged. The men gripped his arms, hauling him toward the truck like a sack of grain. His head lolled, his feet scraping the dirt, leaving streaks of crimson behind. Anna's breath caught in her throat, her hands tightening on the armrest. Clara slowed the car, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "What are they doing?" Julia whispered from the back seat, her voice trembling. Mariana leaned forward, her phone already in hand, ready to call for help. "Don't just sit there. Do something." Anna's instincts screamed at her, a primal urge to act, to stop whatever nightmare was unfolding before them. She rolled down her window, the humid air rushing in, and shouted, "Para decem ele." Her voice cracked through the stillness, sharp and defiant. The men froze, their heads snapping toward the car. Their faces were shadowed under worn caps, but their eyes, cold, unblinking, locked onto Anna's. For a moment, the world stopped, the jungle itself seeming to hold its breath. One of the men, the tallest, stepped forward, his hands still stained with the homeless man's blood. He stole from a woman. He said, his voice flat, almost mechanical, "We're handling it." But there was no woman in sight. No purse, no scattered belongings, no evidence of a crime, just the man, broken and bleeding, slumped against the truck. Anna's stomach churned. He's lying. You know he's lying. Clara's hands shook as she gripped the wheel, her eyes darting between the men and the road. "We need to go," she whispered, but Anna couldn't tear her gaze away. The homeless man's eyes met hers, pleading, desperate, alive. He's still alive. The thought burned in her mind, a command she couldn't ignore. The men turned back to their task, ignoring the girl's car, as if their interruption was a minor inconvenience. But then, from the shadows of the jungle, another figure emerged, a man holding a machete, its blade glinting in the sunlight. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his eyes fixed on the homeless man. Anna's heart stopped as he raised the weapon, the metal catching the light like a promise of death. Run, scream, do something. But before Anna could react, Clara slammed her foot on the gas, the Fiat lurching forward. The tires screeched, kicking up dust, and the world blurred as they sped away. Mariana was already dialing the police, her voice shaking as she tried to explain what they'd seen. "We don't know where we are," she stammered. "Somewhere on the old road to the church." The operator's voice was calm, too calm, asking for details they couldn't provide. "We have to go back," Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Are you crazy?" They had a machete. But Anna's resolve hardened. "You can't leave him. You saw his eyes." They turned the car around the jungle, looming larger now, its shadows deeper, more menacing. As they approached the spot, the pickup truck was gone, its tire tracks the only evidence it had ever been there. The homeless man lay crumpled on the ground, his chest rising and falling faintly. He was alive, but barely. Anna's heart pounded as they slowed the car, unsure whether to approach. What if they come back? What if they're watching? Before they could decide. A motorcycle roared up beside them, its rider a blur of black leather. He leaned close, his voice low and urgent. He stole from someone, he said, echoing the first man's words. Leave it alone. Anna's blood ran cold. The repetition felt wrong, rehearsed like a script meant to silence them. Clara floored the gas again, and they sped toward the church, the jungle swallowing the scene behind them. By the time they reached me, their words were a jumble of fear and guilt. Anna clung to my arm, her eyes haunted. What if we hadn't shouted, she whispered. What if we hadn't gone that way? I pulled her close, my mind racing. What did you stumble into? The jungle, the blood, the machete. It was no random act of violence. It was something darker, something planned. Every night since that day, I close my eyes and see him, the man on the road, his blood pooling in the dirt, his eyes begging for help. And I wonder, did we save him or did we damn him? The church was no sanctuary that day. Its walls, usually warm with faith, felt cold, oppressive, as if the horror Anna and her friends had witnessed had followed them inside. We sat in the back pew, the 4 girls huddled together, their voices low, as they recounted the story again, piecing together details like shards of broken glass. Each word cut deeper, each memory sharper than the last. Anna's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She kept rubbing them together, as if trying to scrub away the memory of those men, their cold eyes, their blood-stained hands. Clara sat rigid, her gaze fixed on the floor, while Julia and Mariana whispered to each other, their words punctuated by nervous glances at the church doors. They're waiting for something to follow them. They're waiting for the jungle to come for them. I tried to focus, to be the steady one, but my mind was a storm. The image of the homeless man, broken and bleeding, burned behind my eyes. I could almost smell the jungle, its damp, rotting scent, the kind that clings to your skin and never lets go. Anna's voice pulled me back. We called the police, she said, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. But they didn't do anything. They asked for the exact location, but we were so scared. We couldn't think straight. Clara nodded, her voice barely audible. We went back to get the license plate, but the truck was gone. He was just lying there. Her words broke, and she pressed her hands to her face as if she could block out the memory. Mariana added, "The guy on the motorcycle. He said the same thing as the others, that the man stole something, but there was nothing there. No woman, no proof. They're lying. You know they're lying." The words echoed in my head, The same thought Anna had on the road. But why? Why go to such lengths to justify dragging a man to his death? I pulled Anna closer, her head resting against my shoulder. You did the right thing, I said, but the words felt hollow. Did they? Or did they just delay the inevitable? The police arrived at the church an hour later, their faces grim but detached. They took the girl's statements, scribbling notes, with a kind of practiced indifference. We'll look into it, the officer said, but his tone suggested otherwise. He asked for details. The trucks make the men's faces the exact spot on the road. Anna tried to describe the location, but the back roads were a maze, unmarked and forgotten. The officer's pen paused, his eyes narrowing. You sure you saw what you saw? He asked. Anna's jaw tightened, and I felt her body tense against mine. We know what we saw, she said, her voice sharp. After the police left, we stayed at the church, unwilling to face the world outside. Some members of the congregation, hearing whispers of the incident, went to the scene. They returned with news that made my blood run cold. The homeless man was still there, alive, sitting on the side of the road, with a few locals tending to him. He's okay, one of them said, a woman with kind eyes and a rosary clutched in her hand. He's hurt, but he's alive. Anna's face crumpled relief and guilt warring in her expression. We saved him, she whispered, but her voice trembled with doubt. Did you just postpone his fate? I couldn't shake the feeling that those men, their cold eyes and rehearsed excuses, weren't done. The jungle had seen too much, held too many secrets. That night, Anna stayed at my place, unable to face her own apartment. We sat on the couch, the TV flickering, with some mindless show, but neither of us watched. She kept replaying the moment she shouted at the men, her voice cutting through the jungle's silence. What if I hadn't said anything? She asked, her eyes distant. What if we'd just driven by? I didn't have an answer. What if you hadn't? The question hung between us, heavy and unyielding. I thought of the church of St. Michael's image, his sword raised against the demon. Was that what they'd faced on that road? A demon in human form, cloaked in lies? Or was it just men, cruel and calculating, hiding behind a flimsy story? The next day, I drove to the spot with Anna and Clara. The road felt different in the daylight, less menacing, but no less oppressive. The jungle loomed on either side, its vines curling like fingers, ready to snatch us away. We found the place where the truck had been, the dirt still stained with faint streaks of blood. Anna knelt her fingers, brushing the ground, as if she could feel the man's pain lingering there. "There's nothing here," Clara said, her voice flat. But I saw it, a glint in the underbrush, half hidden by leaves. I reached down and pulled out a small rusted knife, its blade crusted with something dark. Anna gasped, stepping back. That wasn't there yesterday," she said, her voice shaking. Or was it? My mind raced, piecing together possibilities. Had the men dropped it? Had the police missed it? Or had something or someone left it for us to find? I wrapped the knife in a cloth and tucked it into my bag, my hands trembling. "You're in too deep now. You can't walk away." We reported the knife to the police, but they dismissed it as unrelated, a piece of junk lost in the jungle. Probably just litter. The officer said, his eyes avoiding mine. But I saw the way his hands twitched, the way he glanced at the door, as if he wanted to be anywhere but here. He knows something. He's part of it. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. Anna barely ate her eyes, haunted by the memory of the homeless man's pleading gaze. Clara stopped driving, refusing to take the back roads again. Julia and Mariana clung to each other, jumping at every shadow. And me, I couldn't stop thinking about the knife, the blood, the lies. What did you stumble into? The jungle never forgets. Its roots drink the blood spilled on its soil, and its shadows whisper secrets to those who listen. We thought we'd escaped that road, but it followed us, its claws sinking deeper with every step. Weeks passed, but the incident on the road clung to us like damp rot. Anna changed. She was quieter, her laughter replaced by a nervous edge. She'd wake up at night, gasping her hands, clawing at the sheets, as if she could still feel the jungle's grip. "I see him," she'd whisper, her eyes wide with terror. "The man with the machete. He's watching me." I tried to convince her it was just a nightmare, but I wasn't so sure. The jungle had a way of marking you, of sinking its teeth into your soul and never letting go. I'd drive past that road sometimes, unable to resist, and every time I felt it, a presence, heavy and watchful, lurking in the trees. It's not over. You know it's not. One evening, Anna and I were at a local cafe trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. The place was crowded, the air thick with the scent of coffee and fried pastries. But even here, the world felt wrong. Anna kept glancing at the door, her fingers twisting a napkin into knots. "Do you think he's okay?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "The man we saw, do you think he's really safe?" I opened my mouth to answer, but a shadow fell over our table. A man stood there, his face half hidden by a hood, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. "You're the ones who saw the truck," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. Anna froze her eyes wide. I stood my chair scraping the floor, ready to confront him. "Who are you?" I demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear. "You should have kept driving," he whispered. "Some things are better left alone." Before I could react, he turned and slipped into the crowd, vanishing as quickly as he'd appeared. Anna grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "That was him," she said, her voice trembling. "The man on the motorcycle. He's following you. He knows what you did." My heart pounded, my mind racing. How had he found us? What did he want? I pulled Anna out of the cafe, the world blurring around us. The streets felt alive, the shadows shifting, watching. We drove to the church, seeking refuge in its familiar walls. But even there, the air felt heavy, tainted. The priest, Father Miguel, listened as we poured out the story. The road, the blood, the man with the machete, the stranger in the cafe. His face grew grim, his fingers tracing the cross around his neck. "There are places in this world where darkness lingers," he said. "The jungle. It holds things we cannot understand. You did right to act, but you've stirred something. You've drawn its attention. Its attention." The words sent a chill down my spine. Was it the men? The jungle itself? Or something older? Something that had been waiting in the shadows long before we drove down that road. Father Miguel gave us each a small wooden cross blessed with holy water and told us to pray. "Keep it close," he said, "and stay away from that road." But the road wouldn't let us go. A week later, Clara called, her voice shaking. She'd found a note slipped under her door, written in jagged, uneven script. "You can't save everyone." No signature, no explanation, just those words stained with something dark and sticky. We burned the note, but its words lingered branded into our minds. Anna stopped sleeping. She'd sit by the window, staring into the night, waiting for something to emerge from the darkness. I'd find her, there her eyes, red, her hands clutching the cross Father Miguel had given her. "I should have done more," she'd say. "I should have gotten out of the car. I should have fought." "You did enough. You saved him." I wanted to believe it, but the doubt gnawed at me. The homeless man had vanished from the streets, his fate unknown. Some said he'd been taken to a hospital, others that he'd fled town. But whispers circulated stories of other disappearances, of men seen dragging people into the jungle of blood, that never washed away. One night, I dreamt of the road. The jungle was alive, its vines curling around me, its shadows whispering my name. In the distance, I saw him, the homeless man, his eyes empty, his body broken. He reached for me, his fingers dripping with blood. "You didn't save me," he said, his voice echoing through the trees. "You only delayed it." I woke up screaming Anna's arms around me, her own face wet with tears. "It's not over," she whispered. "It'll never be over." And she was right. The jungle watched us, its shadows stretching longer each day. We'd stumbled into something bigger than us, something that didn't forgive, didn't forget. You can't run from it. You can't hide. The road had claimed us, and no amount of prayer could wash away its mark. My heart thuds against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence of my bedroom. It's 2 a.m., and the darkness feels alive, pressing against my skin like a cold, damp shroud. I lie frozen, staring at the sliver of moonlight slicing through my curtains, when a faint creak, slow, deliberate, cuts through the quiet. My bedroom door is ajar, its black mouth gaping wider than I left it. I didn't hear it open. I didn't hear anything move. But something is here. I can feel its weight, its presence, crouching just beyond my sight, waiting. The air grows thick, heavy, with an unspoken threat. My name is Alex, and this is the night that still haunts me, the night I came face to face with a stranger in my own home. Back then, I was a college student, drowning in textbooks and exams, my life a blur of early mornings and late nights. I'd always been a creature of habit, waking at 3 a.m. to study in the quiet hours when the world felt still untouched by chaos. That night, though, chaos found me. It was the eve of a grueling exam, and exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. I'd dragged myself home at 9 p.m., stomach growling, too tired to care about the meager scraps left in the fridge. A half-eaten sandwich, a wilted lettuce leaf, nothing worth calling dinner. I scrolled through my phone instead, the blue glow burning my eyes as the hours slipped away. By 11 p.m., my battery was on its last legs, and I faced a choice charge, it in the living room, or keep it by my bed as an alarm. The outlet in my room was broken, and the living room felt too far, too exposed. I set the alarm for 2 a.m., hoping the battery would hold, and collapsed into bed. The mosquito net above my bed swayed faintly, casting jagged shadows across the walls. I didn't think much of it then, just the usual tricks of a tired mind. But as I drifted into sleep, A nagging unease settled in my chest, like a stone sinking into dark water. I dreamed of corridors, endless and twisting, where every door I opened led to nothing but more shadows. Then the alarm shattered the dream, a shrill cry that yanked me back to reality. My eyes snapped open, and the first thing I noticed was the door. It was wide open, a black void where it should have been closed. My mother sometimes checked on me at night, but she always shut the door. Always. The room felt wrong, the air too still, too cold. I lay there, heart pounding, staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Just Mom forgetting. Just my imagination. But the mosquito net seemed to pulse its shadows, curling like fingers reaching for me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Something is watching you, my mind whispered. I pushed the thought away, but it clawed back, insistent. I forced myself to sit up, the bed creaking under my weight. My phone's dim light flickered, barely illuminating the room. I reached for the mosquito net, my fingers trembling as I pulled it back. That's when I saw it, a shape low and hunched, emerging from behind the open door. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't Mom. It wasn't anyone I knew. The figure was too tall, too angular, its movements jerky, like a puppet strung by invisible hands. My scream tore through the silence, raw and desperate as I lunged for the door. But so did he. We collided in the doorway, his face inches from mine, pale hollow eyes like black pits that swallowed the light. He raised a finger to his lips, a silent command to be quiet. And then he was gone, a blur of motion, vanishing into the kitchen and out the front door. You're safe now. But are you? The thought looped in my mind, a relentless echo, as I stood trembling in the doorway. My scream had woken the house, but the silence that followed was deafening. I pounded on my mother's bedroom door, my voice cracking as I begged her not to go outside. There was a man in my room. I sobbed the words, tumbling out in a rush. Her face paled, her hands shaking as she pulled me close. We screamed for help, our voices carrying into the night, praying the neighbors would hear. By some miracle, one did a man returning home, late, his footsteps heavy on the gravel outside. He rallied others, and soon the house was alive with voices, flashlights cutting through the dark. We searched every corner, every shadow, but the man was gone. My school bag lay on the kitchen table, its contents spilled across the floor. Notebooks, pens, a crumpled exam schedule. I'd left it in my room. I was sure of it. Why had he gone back? What did he want? The police came later, their questions sharp, and clinical. But they found nothing. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. Just my word against the night. They suggested it was a botched robbery, but their words felt hollow, like they were trying to explain away something they couldn't understand. I couldn't stop replaying those moments. The open door, the hunched figure, the way his eyes seemed to bore into me. My mother held me as I cried her prayers, a soft murmur against the chaos in my head. But the fear didn't leave. It lingered, a cold weight that followed me through the days and weeks that followed. I stopped sleeping in my room, opting for the couch, where the living room's open space felt safer, less like a trap. Every shadow became a threat, every creak a footstep. I kept my phone charged now, always by my side, its alarm set earlier and earlier, as if waking sooner could keep the darkness at bay. The neighbors whispered about it for weeks, their voices hushed as they passed our house. "Did you hear about the boy? Said he saw a man in his room." I hated their pity, their curiosity, but I couldn't escape the questions that haunted me. Why had he been in my room? Why had he crouched there, waiting? And what would have happened if I hadn't set the alarm for 2 a.m.? That extra hour, that thin sliver of time, felt like the only thing standing between me and something unthinkable. I'd always been logical, a student who trusted facts over feelings, but that night shattered my certainty. There was no logic in the way his finger pressed to his lips, no reason in the way his presence seemed to drain the warmth from the room. I told myself it was just a thief, a drifter, someone desperate and gone. But deep down, I wasn't sure. Close your eyes, Alex. Sleep. It's over. But it wasn't. The memory of that night clung to me like damp rot seeping into every quiet moment. I started noticing things after small, inexplicable things. My bedroom door would creak open in the middle of the night, even after I'd locked it. My school bag, neatly packed each evening, would be unzipped by morning, its contents slightly askew. I told my mother, but she dismissed it as stress, her eyes tired from her own sleepless nights. I wanted to believe her, to chalk it all up to an overactive mind, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was as if the stranger had left something behind a shadow that lingered in the corners of my vision, just out of reach. I began to piece together the night in my mind, reconstructing every detail like a puzzle with missing pieces. The open door, the mosquito net's swaying shadows, the man's hollow eyes, they all felt like clues to something larger, something I couldn't grasp. I remembered a story my grandfather once told me about a house he'd lived in as a boy. where footsteps echoed in empty rooms and doors opened on their own. Some places hold on to things, he'd said, his voice low, things that don't let go. I'd laughed it off, then a kid too smart for ghost stories. But now I wondered, was my room one of those places? Had the stranger brought something with him? Or had he awakened something already there? I searched online for answers, scouring forums about hauntings, intruders, anything that could explain the dread that followed me. I found nothing that fit just vague stories of sleep paralysis and shadowy figures, none as real as the man I'd seen. My mother insisted we move after I graduated to a bigger city where the streets buzzed with life and the nights felt less oppressive. The new apartment was bright, modern, with locks that gleamed and doors that stayed shut. But even there, I couldn't shake the habit of checking my room before bed, of listening for sounds that didn't belong. I kept my phone by my side, its alarm set for 2 a.m. A ritual I couldn't break. The stranger was never caught, his face a ghost in my memory. But his presence lingered in the way I flinched at shadows, the way I froze when the house settled at night. I told myself I was lucky that I'd escaped whatever he'd planned. But luck felt like a fragile thing, a thread that could snap at any moment. You're still here, Alex. You survived. But survival came with a cost. Years later, I still carry that night with me, a weight that presses against my chest when the world grows quiet. I've tried to move on, to bury the fear under layers of routine and logic, but it's always there, waiting. I think about the stranger's face, those empty eyes, and I wonder who he was. A thief, a drifter, or something else. Something that didn't belong in my world. I'll never know. But I know this. I check my doors every night, twice, 3 times, until the locks click into place. I keep my phone charged, its alarm set a lifeline against the dark. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake to the feeling of eyes on me, a presence just beyond the door. I tell myself it's nothing, just a trick of the mind. But I never open the door to check. I've learned to live with the fear, to carry it like a scar. It's a reminder that the world isn't as safe as I once thought, that danger can slip through the cracks of even the most ordinary life. I tell my story now, not to scare you, but to warn you. Be careful out there. Lock your doors. Set your alarms. Because you never know who or what is waiting in the shadows, watching, biding its time. My name is Oi, and when I was 12, I learned that some places hold on to their ghosts like a curse. My family lived far from our relatives, so visits to my grandparents' sprawling home at the end of a quiet, tree-lined road were rare treasures. A few houses down, near a desolate park, stood the mansion, an enormous, decaying relic that everyone in the neighborhood avoided. Its windows were black voids. Its walls sagged under years of neglect, and those eerie cartoon stickers plastered across the ground floor and rusted gate seemed to mock anyone who dared approach. Neighbors whispered of dead birds found inside their tiny bodies, inexplicably arranged in neat rows. Once, a cat was discovered lifeless in the foyer, its eyes wide with terror. No one could explain it, but the air around that place felt wrong, heavy, with a silence that pressed against your chest. As kids, my cousins and I were drawn to the mansion's mystery, like moths to a flame. We'd heard the stories, and that summer, fueled by restless curiosity, we hatched a plan to sneak inside. My two older cousins, both 15, were the boldest, insisting they'd scout first. "We'll radio you," when it's clear, they said, their eyes glinting with excitement. The younger ones, including me, would wait for their signal. That night, after dinner, while the adults laughed over coffee, the older cousins slipped out. My heart raced. With a mix of thrill and dread, my torch gripped tightly in my sweaty palm. The wait felt endless each second, stretching into eternity. Then the walkie-talkie hissed to life. "It's fine. Oh, no danger. Get here fast." Their voices sounded off too sharp, too urgent, but we were too caught up in the adventure to question it. Grabbing our torches, we younger cousins crept through the park, the night air thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. The mansion loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the starry sky. Those cartoon stickers glared at us, their faded colors bleeding into the shadows like wounds. My stomach twisted, but I pushed forward, the others close behind. We hesitated at the gate, the rusted metal cold under my fingers. From upstairs, their voices called again, louder this time. "We're up here. Come on." The words echoed, but something in their tone sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just eagerness. It was hunger, a pull that felt wrong, like a hand reaching from the dark to drag us in. Every step toward the mansion felt like wading through ice, my breath catching as the air grew colder, sharper. The stickers seemed to shift in the torchlight, their eyes following us, whispering secrets we weren't meant to hear. We pushed through the gate, the hinges groaning under the weight of years. The front door hung ajar, a black maw inviting us into the unknown. My torch beam danced across the foyer, illuminating cracked tiles and cobwebs that swayed like ghostly fingers. The air inside was stale heavy with the scent of mold and something metallic, like old blood. My younger cousin Lila clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "This feels wrong." "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, but the older cousins' voices crackled again through the walkie-talkie, insistent, almost commanding. "Hurry up, you're missing it." We stepped inside, our footsteps muffled by layers of dust. The darkness seemed to swallow the light, our torches barely piercing the gloom. The stickers lined the walls, their cartoon faces distorted, smiles stretched too wide, eyes too large, as if they were screaming in silence. My heart hammered as we climbed the creaking staircase, each step amplifying the dread pooling in my chest. The air grew colder, with every floor, my breath visible in the dim light. At the top, a long hallway stretched into shadow doors, lining either side like silent sentinels. The voices called again now from behind one of those doors. "Oi, we're here. Open the door." I froze my hand, hovering over the doorknob. The voice was my cousin's, but it wasn't. It was too smooth, too perfect, like a recording played backward. Lila's eyes widened, her face pale. "That's not them," she hissed, pulling me back. The others nodded, their faces mirroring my fear. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The air felt alive, pressing against us, urging us to obey. I clicked the walkie-talkie, my voice trembling. "We're not coming up. You should leave too." Silence answered thick and oppressive, broken only by a faint hum, like a distant lullaby coming from behind the door. We didn't wait for a reply. We ran our torches, bouncing wildly, the stickers seeming to leer as we fled. The moment we burst out of the mansion, the night felt alive with eyes, watching, waiting. My chest burned, but the real terror came when we stumbled back home and saw them, our older cousins laughing on the couch, ice cream dripping from their spoons. We skidded into the living room, breathless, our voices overlapping as we demanded answers. "How did you get here?" I gasped, my heart still racing. My older cousin Mark looked up, confused. "What are you talking about?" "We never went to the mansion." His words hit like a punch. Lila's face drained of color, and I felt the walkie-talkie slip from my hand. They explained their mom had overheard our plan and grounded them, sending them to buy ice cream instead. They hadn't taken the walkie-talkies. They hadn't called us. The room spun as the truth sank in. Whatever we'd heard in that mansion wasn't them. Our mothers' faces paled as we recounted the night. They exchanged glances, then sat us down, their voices low. The mansion, they said, had a grim history. Years ago, a family lived there, a man, his wife, and his elderly parents. The wife ran a daycare, decorating the house with cartoon stickers to cheer the children. They were happy until a job offer lured them to a bigger city. On the way, a horrific accident claimed them all. The mansion was left to rot its ownership, tangled in legal disputes. The stickers stayed fading into grotesque reminders of a lost family. But the neighbors swore the house wasn't empty. Shadows moved in the windows. Voices drifted from the upper floors. And now we'd heard them too. That night, I lay awake, the walkie-talkie's static replaying in my mind. The voice hadn't just called us, it had wanted us, pulling us toward that door. What waited behind it? The question gnawed at me, a cold knot in my stomach. Days after our escape, the mansion's grip lingered, its presence seeping into our lives like a stain. My bicycle's brakes failed on a steep hill, sending me crashing, my arm scarred to this day. The others weren't spared cuts, bruises, strange falls plagued us, as if the house had marked us. The week that followed was a blur of unease. Lila tripped on a stair, her ankle twisting unnaturally. Mark sliced his hand on a glass that shattered without cause. Even our grandmother, usually unshaken, grew pale, her eyes darting to the shadows. She insisted something had followed us, clinging like damp rot. She dragged us to a priest who tied red threads around our wrists and murmured prayers that felt too fragile against the weight of our fear. Miraculously, the accidents stopped, but the mansion's shadow never left me. Years later, the mansion is being renovated, its walls stripped of those cursed stickers. But I can't pass it without feeling it, those voices that hum the pull of something waiting upstairs. I still wonder what would have happened if we'd opened that door. Would we have seen the family, their faces as faded and twisted as the stickers? Or something worse, something that wanted us to stay forever? The question haunts me, a whisper in the dark I can't silence. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine tea and the laughter of neighbors. But something about that old woman's smile made my skin crawl. I am Ali 17 now, but this story takes me back to when I was 11, living in a small sunlit house in Sudan with my family. My mother had just given birth to my youngest sister, a tiny bundle of warmth with eyes like polished onyx. The day she came home from the hospital, our house buzzed with life. Neighbors poured in their voices, overlapping in a chorus of congratulations, their hands bearing gifts of dates and woven blankets. My uncle, a towering man with a laugh that could shake the walls, stayed with us to help during the celebration. The night was alive. Plates clinked with the rhythm of shared meals, and the soft hum of prayers filled the air. But then a shadow slipped through the crowd. An old woman, her face etched with lines like a cracked desert floor, approached my mother. Her shawl was tattered, her eyes too sharp for her frail frame. She leaned close, her voice a low rasp, and said, "What a beautiful child. May she bring you joy." My mother, caught in the glow of motherhood, smiled and thanked her without a second thought. But I saw it, the way the woman's lips curled, not in warmth, but in something else, something hungry. My stomach twisted, a faint warning I couldn't name. I brushed it off, blaming the sugary tea or the late hour. As the evening wound down, the house grew quiet. The guests left their footsteps fading into the warm night. My uncle stayed in the guest room. My parents retreated to their bedroom with my newborn sister, and I crawled into bed, the weight of the day pulling me toward sleep. But the memory of that woman lingered, her face flickering in my mind like a candle struggling against a draft. Why did her smile feel like a mask I tossed in bed, the cotton sheets sticking to my skin in the humid air? The house was still, save for the faint creak of the wooden floorboards settling under the night's weight. I didn't know then that the joy of that day was a fragile thing, a glass ornament teetering on the edge of a table. Something was coming. The world felt heavier, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I closed my eyes, trying to shake the unease, but it clung to me, a cold hand on my shoulder. The night stretched on, and I drifted into a restless sleep, unaware that the safety of our home was about to shatter. The celebration had been a beacon drawing not just friends, but something darker, something that waited in the shadows, watching planning. What kind of monster hides behind a smile? I would find out soon enough in the dead of night, when the world turned upside down. The clock struck 3 a.m., and the silence screamed louder than any voice. I jolted awake, my bladder urging me toward the bathroom. The house was cloaked in darkness, the kind that presses against your eyes, making every shape feel like a threat. I shuffled down the hall, my bare feet cold against the tile floor, the faint glow of moonlight seeping through a cracked window. As I passed my mother's room, I froze. A silhouette stood in the doorway, motionless, like a statue carved from the night itself. My heart thudded a drumbeat in my chest. I thought it was my uncle checking on my sister, so I shook off the fear and continued to the bathroom. But as I stepped out, The air changed. It was thicker, charged with something I couldn't name. Then I saw it. My uncle, his broad frame tense, was grappling with a man in the hallway. The stranger's face was hidden in shadow, but his hands were clawing at my uncle, who was shouting, "Get back to your room, Ali. Now." His voice was raw, desperate. I caught a glimpse of my sister's tiny form cradled in my uncle's arm, her blanket trailing like a ghost. The man lunged, his movements frantic, and I saw a glint of metal, a knife maybe, or something worse. My uncle swung his fist, connecting with the stranger's jaw, and the man stumbled, cursing in a language I didn't recognize. I stood rooted, my legs heavy as stone. Run, Ali, run. But I couldn't. The scene burned into my eyes. My uncle, a lion, protecting his pride, fighting to keep my sister safe. The stranger's shadow seemed to stretch, unnatural, as if the darkness itself was aiding him. My uncle yelled again, and this time I obeyed, stumbling back to my room. My heart was a wildfire, consuming every thought. Who was he? Why was he here? The answer clawed at me, but I couldn't grasp it. Minutes later, the wail of police sirens pierced the night. Blue and red lights danced across the walls, casting jagged shadows. I pressed my ear to the door, catching fragments of conversation. My uncle's voice steady, but shaken, and the low murmur of officers. I wanted to run to my mother, to make sure my sister was safe. But fear held me back. What if he was still out there? The house, once a haven, now felt like a trap, every corner hiding a new threat. I sank to the floor, my breath shallow, and waited for the world to make sense again. When my uncle finally knocked on my door, his face was pale, his hands trembling. "Go back to sleep, Ali," he said, but his eyes told a different story. Something had tried to take my sister. The night wasn't over, and the truth was waiting to unravel, sharper than any blade. The morning sun didn't bring peace. It only illuminated the horror of what we'd escaped. Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, but the warmth couldn't reach me. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. My uncle stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the light, his shoulders slumped, as if carrying an invisible weight. My mother was upstairs clutching my sister, her eyes red from crying. I needed answers. What happened last night? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My uncle turned his face, a map of exhaustion and fury, and what he told me made my blood run cold. The man in our house had been hired to kidnap my sister. He'd slipped in through an unlocked window, silent as a snake, his target the crib where my sister slept. My uncle woken, by a strange instinct to get water, had caught him in the act. The fight I'd witnessed was my uncle's desperate struggle to save her. But the real horror came next. The police had traced the man's orders back to someone we never suspected, the old woman from the celebration. Her smile, her words, they were a lie. She wasn't there to bless my sister. She was scouting, marking her prey. The officer's words echoed in my mind. She's done this before. 4 other babies sold to strangers. My stomach churned. How could someone so frail hide such evil? The woman had woven herself into our joy, her presence so unassuming. Yet she was a predator, her kindness a trap. My uncle's quick thinking had saved my sister, but the thought of what could have happened haunted me. What if he hadn't woken up? The image of my sister vanishing into the night, her tiny hands reaching for us, clawed at my heart. We never told my father, who was working abroad, about that night. It was a silent agreement, a shield to protect him from the terror we'd faced. My sister, now 6, is a whirlwind of laughter and mischief, unaware of how close she came to being lost. But I can't forget. Every time I see her smile, I see the shadow of that night, the man in the hallway, the woman's crooked grin. Evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, hiding in plain sight. The police arrested the woman and her accomplice, sentencing them to life behind bars. But the questions linger. How many other families didn't escape? How many other smiles hide monsters? I thank God every day for my uncle's vigilance, for the instinct that pulled him from bed. Our home is safe now, but the night taught me something. Trust is fragile, and darkness waits for a single moment of weakness. Never let your guard down. I sat on the bus, my swollen belly, a silent promise of life. But something felt wrong, terribly wrong. A woman's eyes, unblinking and hollow, locked onto me from across the aisle, her gaze slicing through the dim light like a blade. She wasn't just looking. She was devouring me, her stare crawling over my skin, hungry for something I couldn't name. My name is Maria, and I was 7 months pregnant, carrying the weight of my unborn child and the hope of a new beginning. That evening, the bus rattled through the dusty streets of our small town, its engine groaning under the weight of too many passengers. The seats were worn, the air stale with sweat and cheap perfume. But it was her presence that made the space feel suffocating. She sat 3 rows ahead, her body rigid, her head turned unnaturally to fix her eyes on me. Her face was a mask of stillness, no smile, no frown, just an unrelenting stare that seemed to see through me, into me, as if she could taste the life growing inside my womb. I shifted uncomfortably, my hands instinctively cradling my belly. The girl beside me, a stranger with kind eyes, noticed my unease. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice a soft anchor in the storm of my growing dread. I nodded, but my heart pounded a primal rhythm, urging me to flee. "Run! Maria, run now!" a voice inside me screamed. But the bus was moving, and there was nowhere to go. The woman's gaze never wavered. Her eyes, dark pools that seemed to swallow the light around her. I noticed something, then something that made my breath catch in my throat. Her upper lip was smooth unnaturally, so lacking the faint groove of a philtrum. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, a warning from childhood. Beware the ones without a philtrum. Maria, they are not human when the sun sets. The bus lurched over a pothole, and for a moment her head tilted, her eyes glinting like those of a predator tracking prey. "Don't look away," I told myself, but my body betrayed me, my gaze dropping to the floor. The girl beside me leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "She's been staring at you since we boarded. Want to switch seats?" I nodded, grateful for her kindness, and we swapped places, her body now a fragile shield between me and that piercing stare. But even as I hid, I could feel her eyes boring into me, a weight that pressed against my chest, making each breath a struggle. The memory of my grandmother's stories flooded back tales of the whack-whack creatures that wore human skin by day, but shed it at night, transforming into monstrous birds that hunted the vulnerable. They were drawn to life, to the innocent, to the unborn. Never eat what they offer. She'd warned, her voice trembling with a fear I hadn't understood until now. I clutched my belly tighter, whispering a silent prayer for my child. The bus stopped, and a few passengers shuffled off, but she remained, her body unnaturally still, her eyes never leaving me. The air grew colder, the scent of decay creeping into my nostrils, though no one else seemed to notice. Was I imagining it? My mind raced, torn between reason and the primal terror that screamed she was no ordinary woman. As the bus continued its journey, she stood, her movements slow and deliberate, like a puppet guided by invisible strings. She stepped closer, her shadow stretching across the aisle, and my heart thundered so loudly I thought it would burst. "Stay calm, Maria. Protect your child." The girl beside me tensed, her hand brushing mine, as if to say, "I'm here." But the woman stopped, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. It was a challenge, a promise of something unspeakable. She leaned forward, her breath cold against the air, and whispered words I couldn't hear, but felt like needles in my skin. Then, as suddenly as she'd moved, she sat back down, her eyes still locked on me, unblinking, unrelenting. The bus pulled into my stop, and I stumbled out, my legs trembling as I gulped the night air. But as I turned to glance back, she was there, standing at the bus door, her silhouette framed against the flickering streetlight. She's following me. Panic surged, and I hurried toward the crowded market nearby, weaving through vendors and shoppers, their voices a blur against the pounding in my ears. I dared not look back, but I could feel her presence, a shadow, trailing just out of sight, her gaze a weight that clung to my soul. Every step I took felt like a betrayal of my own courage, my feet pounding against the uneven pavement as I fled from the woman who was no woman. The night was alive with sounds, vendors haggling, children laughing, but beneath it all was a silence, a void where her presence lingered, watching, waiting. I could still feel her eyes, those hollow pits tracking me through the crowd, and I knew she wasn't done with me yet. The market was a maze of lights and chaos, but it offered no comfort. My hands trembled as I clutched my bag, my belly heavy with the weight of my unborn child. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see her standing there, her smooth-lipped face grinning in the shadows. Nothing. Just the crowd oblivious to the terror that gripped me. Keep moving, Maria, I urged myself, my breath ragged as I darted toward a taxi stand. A man, grizzled and weary, leaned against his cab, and I practically threw myself inside, slamming the door shut. "Drive!" I gasped, my voice barely my own. He didn't ask questions, just pulled away, the tires screeching as we left the market behind. But safety was an illusion. As the taxi wound through the narrow streets, I caught a glimpse of something in the side mirror, a flicker of movement, too swift to be human. My heart sank. She's still there. The driver noticed my panic, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "You okay, lady?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. I nodded, unable to speak, my hands pressed against my belly, as if I could shield my child from whatever pursued us. The stories of the whack-whack swirled in my mind, their hunger for the unborn, their ability to slip between worlds. Was she one of them? Or was my fear twisting reality into something monstrous? When I reached home, my father was waiting, his face etched with worry. He took one look at me and pulled me into his arms, his embrace a fortress against the night. "What happened, Maria?" he asked, his voice trembling. I told him everything. The woman's stare, her missing philtrum, the way she followed me. His eyes darkened, and he whispered, "I saw a bird tonight. A big one, circling the house." His words sent a chill through me, anchoring my fear to the stories of my childhood. The whack-whack transforms at night. My grandmother had said, its wings silent, its hunger endless. Days passed, but the terror didn't fade. Knocks echoed on our windows at odd hours, sharp and deliberate, like talons tapping glass. I'd lie awake, my heart racing, waiting for the sound to return. One evening, a friend from the neighborhood visited, her face pale, as she described a woman she'd seen outside her window. A woman with no philtrum, her eyes glinting in the moonlight. My blood ran cold. It was her, the same creature, hunting, watching, waiting. What does she want? I wondered, my mind spiraling into a trance of fear and memory. Each knock on the window, pulling me deeper into dread. My father took me to a local priest who blessed our home and gave me a charm to wear, a small amulet to ward off evil. The knocks stopped, but the memory of her face lingered, etched into my nightmares. I began to question everything. Was she a monster, or was she a warning? The whack-whack was said to prey on the vulnerable. But why me? Why my child? The answers eluded me, but the fear remained a shadow that followed me long after that night on the bus. Even now, as I hold my child safe and warm, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere in the darkness, those hollow eyes are still watching, waiting for their moment to strike. My breath catches as the sharp, rhythmic clack of high heels pierces the silence of the stairwell, echoing like a heartbeat in the dead of night. I'm 13, trudging up the dimly lit stairs of our apartment building on the 7th floor, my older brother already racing ahead. It's late afternoon, the sky bruised with the weight of an impending storm, and the air feels thick, heavy with something I can't name. The elevator's broken again, its doors jammed shut like a sealed tomb, so we're stuck climbing the endless flights. My school bag swings against my hip, heavy with textbooks, and my sneakers squeak faintly on the worn concrete steps. My brother's footsteps fade above me, leaving me alone with the hum of flickering fluorescent lights. I reach the 4th floor, panting, when the sound stops me cold. Clack, clack, clack. It's not just the sound. It's the precision, the deliberate pace, like someone's walking with purpose, not haste. I pause, one hand gripping the rusted railing, my heart thudding against my ribs. I think it's Mrs. Alvarez, our neighbor on the 4th floor, always bustling around in her flashy outfits. She's kind, always slipping me candies. When I pass her door, her red high heels clicking as she moves. Mrs. Alvarez. I call softly, my voice swallowed by the stairwell's echo. No answer. Just the clack, 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 growing louder, closer, as if the heels are climbing toward me. I wait, expecting her familiar smile, but the sound stops abruptly, leaving a void that feels wrong, unnatural. The air grows colder, a chill creeping up my spine like icy fingers. I glance down the stairwell, but it's empty, the shadows pooling in corners like spilled ink. My gut twists. Something's off, but I can't place it. I shake my head, telling myself it's just exhaustion from school, and force my legs to move. The higher I climb, the heavier my steps feel, as if the air itself is pressing me down. By the time I reach our apartment, my hands are trembling as I fumble with the keys. That night, I collapse into bed, the day's weight pulling me into a restless sleep. But around midnight, I jolt awake, my body drenched in sweat, my heart racing like I've been running for my life. The room is dark, the only light a faint sliver of moonlight slipping through the curtains. I lie still, trying to calm my breathing, when I hear it again. Clack, clack, clack. It's faint, distant, but unmistakable, coming from somewhere outside my room. My stomach lurches. It's not possible. No one's awake. My parents are in their room. My brother snoring across the hall. I pull the blanket tighter, my mind racing. It's just the building settling, I tell myself. But the sound grows louder, closer, until it feels like it's right outside my door. I squeeze my eyes shut, praying it stops, but the rhythm is relentless. Each clack a hammer against my nerves. I don't dare move, don't dare breathe too loudly, as if whatever's out there might hear me. The sound fades eventually, but the dread lingers, wrapping around me like a shroud. I don't sleep again that night, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting for something to step through. The next night, the memory of those heels haunts me, a ghostly echo that refuses to fade. I try to focus on homework, but my mind keeps drifting to that sound, so sharp, so deliberate. I tell myself it was nothing, just pipes, or a neighbor, or my imagination playing tricks. But deep down, I know it wasn't. The air in our apartment feels different now, heavier, like it's holding its breath. I avoid the stairwell when I get home from school, taking the long way through the back entrance, even though it's dark and smells of damp concrete. Anything to avoid that sound again. I'm in bed by 10 p.m. The room pitch black, except for the faint glow of a street lamp outside. I've left the window cracked open, hoping the cool air will calm my nerves, but it only makes the room feel exposed, vulnerable. I drift into a shallow sleep. My dreams tangled with images of red heels clicking on endless stairs. Then, sometime in the early hours, I wake again, my body slick with sweat, my limbs frozen. I try to move, but it's like my body's locked in place, my muscles refusing to obey. Sleep paralysis, I think, remembering a YouTube video I watched once. My heart pounds a frantic drum beat in my chest as I strain to wiggle my toes to break free. That's when I see it, a shadow in the corner of my room, darker than the darkness around it. It's not just a shadow. It's shaped humanoid, standing impossibly still. My eyes strain to make sense of it, but the mosquito net above my bed distorts everything, turning the room into a haze of half-seen shapes. The shadow shifts, and my breath catches as I realize it's moving closer, gliding without sound. Then I see her, Mrs. Alvarez, or something, wearing her face. Her skin is pale, almost glowing in the dark, her eyes sunken and lifeless. She's wearing the red dress she loved, the one she wore to church, and those red high heels gleaming like fresh blood. But there's something wrong with her face, too still, too empty, like a mask stretched over nothing. She doesn't speak, doesn't move her lips, but her presence fills the room with a suffocating weight. I want to scream, to run, but my body betrays me, pinned to the bed, like an insect under glass. Her head tilts, and I swear I hear a faint clack as her heel touches the floor, though she hasn't moved. My mind screams at me to move, just move, and I focus every ounce of will on my toes, wiggling them until the paralysis breaks. I gasp, bolting upright, and the shadow vanishes, leaving only the echo of that clack in my ears. I stumble to my parents' room, tears streaming down my face, and wake my mom. She holds me, praying softly, her voice a lifeline in the dark. But even as she whispers, I can't shake the image of that pale face, those lifeless eyes watching me from the corner. The next morning, the world feels wrong, like a picture slightly out of focus. My mom's prayers linger in my mind, but they can't erase the terror of last night. I avoid my room, staying close to my parents, my brothers teasing about my nightmares, only making me feel more isolated. Then, as we're eating breakfast, a neighbor knocks on our door, her face pale, her voice trembling. She tells us Mrs. Alvarez was found dead in her apartment last night, dressed in her favorite red dress and those red high heels, lying in her bathroom next to her cat, both lifeless for reasons no one can explain. The police say it might have been a heart attack, but the cat's death makes no sense. My stomach drops, the room spinning, as I realize what I saw wasn't a dream. I don't tell my parents about the shadow, the woman in my room. I'm too scared they'll think I'm crazy, or worse, that saying it out loud will make it real. But that night, it happens again. I wake at 3 a.m., my body locked in place, the air thick with that same suffocating dread. She's there, standing at the foot of my bed, her red dress vivid against the darkness, her cat curled at her feet, its fur matted with blood. Her eyes lock onto mine, and though her lips don't move, I hear her voice, cold and hollow. Why didn't you say hello? The words sink into me, heavy with accusation, and I realize she's talking about the stairwell when I called her name and waited. My heart races, and I pray silently, the words tumbling through my mind as I force my toes to move. When I break free, she's gone, the room empty, but the echo of her voice lingers. Days pass, and I research sleep paralysis, desperate for answers. I find stories of hags and shadow people, entities that haunt the liminal space between sleep and waking. Some say they're spirits, others hallucinations. But none explain why she looked like Mrs. Alvarez, why her cat was there, why her voice felt so real. My family notices my fear, and my mom starts leaving a Bible under my pillow. But it doesn't stop the questions. Why did she come to me? Was she angry I didn't greet her that day? Or was she something else? Something wearing her face, drawn to me for reasons I'll never understand. Years later, I still hear those heels in my nightmares, their clack a reminder of that night. The apartment is far behind me, but the fear remains a shadow that follows me. I wonder if she's still there, waiting in that stairwell, her red heels clicking, searching for someone to say hello. It was as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath, watching me. At 16, I was a ranch hand in the wilds of Idaho, where the air carried the scent of pine and secrets. My days were spent chasing runaway horses across rugged trails, my trusty mare Angel, my only companion. She was a spirited creature, her chestnut coat gleaming under the sun, her playful nudges more like a dog's than a horse's. But there was one trail deep in the mountains that changed her. It changed me. A narrow path wound past an old shack, its weathered boards sagging like the bones of something long forgotten. Every time we approached, a chill would settle in my gut, sharp and unyielding, as if the air itself whispered warnings I couldn't quite hear. The shack wasn't just old, it was wrong. Its windows were black voids, swallowing light rather than reflecting it. The door hung crooked, half open, inviting yet forbidding. I'd ridden past it dozens of times, but each pass felt heavier, like the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my back. Angel felt it too. Her ears would flatten her hooves, stomping restlessly. Her playful spirit replaced by a nervous energy that made my own heart race. I'd urge her forward, my voice low, coaxing her to move faster, but her reluctance mirrored my own. Something about that shack wasn't just abandoned. It was abandoned for a reason. One evening, as the sun dipped below the peaks, casting long shadows that seemed to crawl toward us, I found myself lingering near the shack longer than usual. A horse had strayed too far, and the trail had led me right to its doorstep. The air grew thick, heavy, with the scent of damp wood and something metallic, like old blood. I dismounted my boots, crunching on the gravel, each step louder than it should have been. The silence of the forest was unnatural. No birds, no wind, just a suffocating stillness. I stood there, staring at the shack, my breath shallow, my pulse loud in my ears. Why does this place feel alive? I thought, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answered. Angel snorted, her eyes wide, and I swore I saw movement in the darkened window, a flicker, like a shadow shifting just out of sight. I didn't tell anyone about that moment. Not the other ranch hands, not my family. But the shack stayed with me, its presence lingering in my dreams, where I'd see those black windows staring back, unblinking. I started avoiding that trail, taking longer routes to round up the horses, but the feeling followed me. It was as if the shack knew I'd seen it, knew I'd felt its pull. I couldn't shake the thought that something inside was waiting, patient and hungry. That night, as I lay in my bunk, the wind outside howled like a voice calling my name, and I wondered if I'd ever escape the shadow of that place. Some stories cling to you like damp rot seeping into your bones. In town one afternoon, I sat across from an older ranch hand named Tom, his weathered face creased with years of sun and secrets. Over coffee, I mustered the courage to ask about the shack. His eyes darkened, and a strange grin spread across his face. Not friendly, but not cruel either, just knowing. "You really want to know, kid?" he asked, his voice low, pulling me into his words like a hook. I nodded, my throat dry, and he began to tell me about Frederick Beale, the man who'd built that shack with his own hands. Beale was a loner, Tom said, a man who wanted nothing to do with the world below the mountains. In the 1940s, he'd carved out a life in that shack, far from town, living off what he could hunt or gather. Every summer, he'd ride down to stock up on supplies, his face weathered but kind, his voice carrying stories of the wild. The townsfolk liked him, looked forward to his visits, but they noticed he never spoke of the shack itself. It was as if it didn't exist in his stories, a void he refused to acknowledge. Then, one summer, Beale didn't come down. Weeks turned to months, and the town grew uneasy. The sheriff, along with a few deputies, rode out to check on him, their horses uneasy as they neared the shack. What they found was a scene that haunted Tom's telling. The forest was silent, the air thick with a foul stench. The shack's door was boarded shut, the windows nailed tight, as if Beale had been trying to keep something out or in. They pried the door open, and the sight inside stopped them cold. Beale's body lay sprawled on the floor, a revolver still clutched in his hand, a single bullet hole in his temple. His face, Tom said, was frozen in terror, his eyes wide and unseeing. They searched the shack, finding nothing but a crumpled note in his coat pocket. The handwriting was jagged, desperate, the words scrawled in a frenzy. "Help me, God. I've gone blind." The town was shaken. Beale, they reasoned, had lost his sight, trapped in the mountains, with no way to hunt, no way to survive the winter. Rather than starve, he'd made a choice. But Tom's voice dropped as he leaned closer, his eyes searching mine. "That's what they say," he whispered. "But some folks think it wasn't just blindness. Something in that shack drove him to it. Something he saw before he couldn't see at all." I felt a chill, the coffee in my hand suddenly cold. The shack wasn't just a place, it was a trap, a thing that fed on isolation, on fear. I left that diner with Beale's story burning in my mind, his final words echoing like a warning I couldn't ignore. Every time I passed that shack, it felt like it was waiting for me to look back. After Tom's story, the mountains didn't feel the same. The trails I once rode with confidence now seemed to twist toward that shack, no matter which path I took. Angel grew worse, her playful spirit dimmed her eyes, darting toward the shack, even when we were miles away. I'd feel it too, a pull, like a hand tugging at my thoughts, urging me to stop, to look, to step inside. I fought it, but the shack's shadow grew longer, darker, seeping into every quiet moment. At night, I'd lie awake, the memory of Beale's note vivid in my mind. Help me, God. I've gone blind. What had he seen? What had driven a man to build a life so far from others, only to end it in despair? One night, I couldn't avoid the trail. A horse had bolted deep into the mountains, and the only way to catch it led past the shack. The moon was high, casting a pale glow that made the trees look like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. As we approached, Angel stopped dead, her body trembling. I whispered to her, my voice shaking, but she wouldn't move. The shack loomed ahead, its silhouette sharper than it should have been, as if it absorbed the moonlight. I dismounted my legs, heavy, my breath catching in my throat. The air was thick, the same metallic scent from before now, stronger, almost choking. I took a step closer, drawn by something I couldn't name, my hand reaching out as if to touch the door. Then I saw it, a flicker in the window, not a shadow, but a shape, indistinct, yet human. My heart pounded, my body frozen as I stared into the black void. The shape didn't move, but I felt its gaze heavy and unrelenting. Run, my mind screamed, but my feet wouldn't obey. Angel's sudden rear broke the spell, her hooves kicking up dirt as she pulled me back to reality. I climbed onto her back and urged her away, the shack's presence lingering like a weight on my chest. I never told anyone what I saw that night, but I knew it wasn't just my imagination. Something in that shack had seen me just as it had seen Beale. Years later, I left the ranch, but the shack never left me. I'd dream of it, its windows staring like eyes, its door creaking open to reveal nothing but darkness. I'd wake with Beale's words in my head, a prayer unanswered. The town tore the shack down eventually, but I wonder if that was enough. Some places don't just hold memories. They hold something worse, something that watches, waits, and never forgets. If you're ever in those mountains, keep riding. Don't stop. Don't look back. Because whatever's in that shack, it's still there, blind, or not waiting for someone new to claim. In the dim flicker of the theater's projector, her eyes caught mine, glinting like twin stars in a void, pulling me into a moment I couldn't escape. It was a humid evening in Tijuana, Mexico, in the late 1970s, and my grandfather, a young man barely out of his teens, decided to lose himself in the escapism of a movie. The theater was an old relic, its velvet seats worn thin, the air thick with the scent of stale popcorn and cigarette smoke. He sat alone, the screen's glow casting long shadows across the sparsely filled rows. The film, some forgotten drama, hummed in the background, but his attention drifted. That's when he noticed her, a woman sitting a few seats away, her silhouette sharp against the flickering light. Her presence felt like a whisper against his skin, subtle yet undeniable. She turned her gaze, locking onto his, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. Her eyes, dark and fathomless, seemed to hold secrets no one should know. Without a word, she slid into the seat beside him, her movements fluid, almost too graceful. Feel this moment, something in his mind urged as her cold fingers brushed against his. The chill startled him, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he found himself holding her hand, the icy touch anchoring him to her. The film's dialogue faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat, pounding louder than he expected. She leaned closer, her breath cool against his cheek, and before he knew it, their lips met. It wasn't passion that drove him. It was something deeper, like falling into a trance where time didn't exist. Stay here, in this moment. The air seemed to whisper, wrapping him in a roux of surreal calm. She shivered, though the theater was warm, and he draped his jacket over her shoulders, a gesture that felt both chivalrous and instinctive. Her smile was faint, almost sad, as she nestled into the fabric. The movie played on, but he barely noticed. Every detail of her consumed him, the way her dark hair caught the light, the way her skin felt like marble under his touch, the way her silence spoke louder than words. What is it about her? He wondered, his thoughts looping, unable to break free. The theater's darkness became a cocoon, isolating them from the world outside. He didn't question why she was there, or why she'd chosen him. It was as if she'd always been there, waiting. When the credits rolled, the spell broke. She stood, her movements deliberate, and suggested they grab a drink at a bar across the street. Her voice was soft, almost too soft, like it came from somewhere far away. She handed his jacket back, and as she did, something slipped into his palm, a small silver ring, cold as ice. "I don't have much," she said, her eyes avoiding his. "I'm homeless." The word hung between them, jarring in its bluntness. He wanted to ask more, but she was already moving toward the bathroom, her figure dissolving into the crowd. "Wait for me outside," she called, her voice fading like an echo. He stood there, clutching the ring, its weight heavier than it should have been, as if it carried a story he wasn't ready to hear. The ring burned cold in my grandfather's hand. A silent scream that something was wrong, but he stood frozen, waiting for her to return. The theater's lobby was a blur of faces, laughter, and the clatter of footsteps, but he felt detached, like he was watching it all through a fogged window. He leaned against the wall outside the women's bathroom, the ring turning over and over in his fingers. Its surface was smooth, etched with faint patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking. "She'll be back," he told himself, but minutes stretched into an eternity. 5 minutes. 10. The crowd thinned, and still no sign of her. A knot tightened in his chest, a mix of confusion and unease. Go check, his mind urged. But something held him back, a primal instinct that whispered, "Don't." He approached the theater manager, a wiry man with tired eyes, and described her dark hair, pale skin, a quiet voice that seemed to linger in the air. The manager frowned, shaking his head. "No one like that's been here," he said, his tone clipped. My grandfather insisted, his voice rising, and the manager reluctantly agreed to check the bathroom. When he returned, his face was blank. "Empty," he said. "No one's in there." The words hit like a punch. She couldn't have slipped past him. He'd been standing right there. His eyes darted to the exits, the lobby, the street outside, searching for her shadow. Nothing. Where did she go? The question looped in his mind, each repetition louder, more desperate. Clutching the ring, he crossed the street to the bar she'd mentioned, a dimly lit place with peeling paint and the hum of conversation. The air inside was heavy, thick with cigarette smoke and the tang of cheap whiskey. He approached the bartender, a grizzled man with a bored expression, and asked if he'd seen her. The description spilled out her eyes, her voice the way she moved like she didn't belong to this world. The bartender shook his head, uninterested, but suggested he talk to the owner. My grandfather waited, his fingers tracing the ring's edges, its coldness seeping into his skin. She was real, he told himself, but doubt crept in, a shadow that grew with every passing second. When the owner appeared, a heavy-set man with a cautious gaze, my grandfather repeated the story. He held out the ring, its silver glinting under the bar's dim lights. The owner's face changed. His eyes widened. His jaw tightened. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice low, almost accusatory. My grandfather explained the words, tumbling out, but the owner's expression grew darker. "That's impossible," he said, stepping back. The air in the bar seemed to thicken, pressing against my grandfather's chest. He demanded to know why his voice shaking. The owner hesitated, then leaned in his words, barely a whisper. "That ring, it belonged to her. She was here in this town, but not anymore." My grandfather's heart pounded. Not anymore. The question hung in the air unanswered as the world tilted beneath him. She was dead, murdered a year ago. Yet I held her ring, felt her touch, heard her voice, and now the world felt like a lie. The bar owner's words cut through my grandfather like a blade. "She was killed," he said, his voice heavy with something like fear. "Right here in Tijuana, about a year back. Found her in an alley not far from this bar." He described her dark hair, pale skin, a quiet presence that drew people in. It was her. My grandfather's hand trembled, the ring slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the bar. The sound echoed sharp and final, like a door slamming shut on reality. He wanted to argue, to say it was a mistake, but the owner's eyes held no doubt. "That ring," the owner said, pointing, "was buried with her. How do you have it?" My grandfather stumbled out of the bar, the night air biting at his skin, the streets of Tijuana alive with music and laughter, felt wrong, like a stage set for a play he didn't understand. She was real, he kept telling himself, but the memory of her cold touch gnawed at him. Her lips, her hands, her voice, they were vivid, etched into his mind like a photograph. Yet the owner's story painted a different truth. A woman taken too soon, her life snuffed out in violence, her ring a relic of a tragedy. He looked down at it, still in his hand, its weight heavier than ever. What was she? The question looped endless, pulling him into a spiral of doubt and fear. Back home, he sat in the dark, the ring on the table before him. Every creak of the house, every shadow in the corner felt like her presence lingering. Close your eyes and see her, his mind whispered, and he did her face, her smile, the sadness in her eyes. He wondered if she'd chosen him, if she'd needed him to carry her story, or was it something darker? A spirit trapped, reaching out for reasons he'd never know. He thought of the theater, its dim lights and heavy air, a place where the line between the living and the dead seemed to blur. Go back, a part of him urged, but he couldn't. The fear was too raw, too real. Years later, he still carried the ring, never wearing it, but never letting it go. He'd tell the story to anyone who'd listen, his voice steady, but his eyes distant. Was it her spirit? He'd ask, not expecting an answer. Or something else? The coldness of her touch, the way she vanished, the ring that shouldn't exist, they haunted him, a puzzle with no solution. Even now, decades later, he'd wake in the night, certain he heard her voice calling from the shadows. She's still out there, he'd think, and the thought would keep him awake until dawn. The ring, a silent witness to a truth he'd never fully grasp. My earliest memory isn't warmth or laughter. It's the suffocating weight of darkness, the kind that clings to your skin and burrows into your bones. I was barely too young to understand the world, yet old enough to feel its sharp edges. My name is Diana, and back then, my family lived in the basement of a stranger's house in Massachusetts. It was a damp, crumbling space, a forgotten corner of the world where hope felt like a distant rumor. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, and the single bulb dangling from the ceiling cast jagged shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. We had nothing but a mattress on the cold floor, 2 warped cabinets, and a scattering of furniture that creaked under the weight of our poverty. My parents, immigrants struggling to carve out a life, tucked my older sister and me into that mattress each night, their whispers of love battling the oppressive silence. But the silence never lasted. Every night, as the world above us slept, something stirred in that basement. I'd wake to the sensation of being watched, my tiny heart pounding, as if it knew something my mind couldn't grasp. The darkness wasn't just empty. It was alive, heavy, pressing against my chest. The mattress was our sanctuary, but beyond its edges, the room felt like a trap. I remember the cabinets most vividly, tall looming shapes that seemed to lean closer in the dark, their chipped paint hiding secrets I was too young to name. My parents slept on the floor, their breathing a fragile rhythm, while my sister clung to me, her warmth the only thing keeping me grounded. I didn't know fear then, not the way adults do, but I felt it in my gut, a twisting dread that grew stronger each night. The basement wasn't just a place. It was a presence, watching, waiting. I'd lie there, eyes wide, staring into the void, sensing something just beyond my understanding. The air would grow colder, not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had opened a door to a frozen world. My breath would catch, and I'd strain to hear anything, a footstep, a whisper, anything to explain the weight of that unseen gaze. And then I'd see them, white hands, pale as bone, reaching out from beneath the cabinet. Not human, not quite, but deliberate, moving with a purpose that made my skin crawl. They weren't just hands. They were a violation, an intrusion into the safety of our fragile world. Their fingers, long and unnaturally smooth, traced shapes in the air, curling and beckoning as if calling me closer. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, just watched, transfixed, as they danced in the dark. My mother would stir, pulling me back to her, her voice a soft lullaby that promised safety. But even her warmth couldn't erase the image of those hands glowing faintly in the shadows, waiting for me to reach back. What were they? I'd ask myself, too young to form the question, but old enough to feel its weight. They weren't just a child's imagination. They were too real, too deliberate. The basement held them, cradled them, as if it had birthed something ancient and hungry. Each night they returned, and each night I felt less like a child and more like prey. The hands became my secret, a terror I couldn't name, but couldn't escape. They were always there, waiting in the dark, their pale fingers curling like a promise of something unspeakable. I was too young to understand death or spirits, but I knew those hands didn't belong in our world. They moved with a grace that was wrong, like a spider weaving a web you only notice when it's too late. Each night, I'd wake to that same icy chill, the air turning thick and heavy, as if the basement itself was holding its breath. The hands would emerge slow at first, then faster, their movements hypnotic, yet horrifying. They'd wave, beckon, draw invisible patterns that seemed to pulse with meaning I couldn't decipher. I remember one night clearer than the rest. The bulb above had flickered out, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight seeping through a cracked window. My sister was asleep, her breathing soft, but I was wide awake, my eyes locked on the cabinet. The hands appeared, their whiteness stark against the shadows, and this time they reached further, their fingers stretching toward the mattress. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst, but I couldn't look away. Reach out, they seemed to say. Come closer. I wanted to scream, to wake my parents, but my body was frozen, pinned by an invisible weight. The hands paused, as if sensing my fear, then retreated. vanishing into the darkness beneath the cabinet. My mother woke, her arms pulling me close, her voice a trembling shield against the night. "It's just a dream, Diana," she'd whisper, but her eyes betrayed her. She'd seen something too, hadn't she? I never asked, too afraid of the answer. The hands didn't just scare me. They changed me. I stopped feeling safe, even in the daylight. The basement became a prison, its walls closing in its shadows, whispering secrets. I'd stare at the cabinets during the day, wondering what lived beneath them, what waited for the lights to go out. I started noticing other things. The air in the basement was never still. It moved like a breath you couldn't hear. Objects would shift slightly, a chair out of place, a cabinet door ajar. My parents dismissed it as my imagination, but I knew better. The hands weren't random. They wanted something. Me, my sister. I couldn't tell. Each night, I'd fight sleep, dreading the moment they'd return. When they did, it was always the same, that cold, that weight, those pale fingers, reaching always just out of reach. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The hands were real as the mattress, as real as my fear. They were a message, a warning, or maybe an invitation to something I couldn't understand. When we finally moved out at 2, I thought the nightmare would end. But the hands followed me, not in the new house, but in my mind. Their image burned into every dark corner I saw. Years passed, and the hands became a memory. I buried a childhood fear I tried to outgrow. But some truths don't let you go. They claw their way back, demanding to be seen. I was 14, sitting with my older sister, laughing about our old life in that basement. The memories were hazy, like a dream you can't quite grasp. But the hands were crystal clear. I hadn't spoken of them in years, convincing myself they were a figment of a scared child's mind. Then my sister said something that stopped my heart. "Did you ever see those hands?" she asked, her voice low, her eyes searching mine. The hands that came from under the cabinet at night, the white ones. They reached for us. The room spun. My breath caught, and for a moment I was back in that basement, staring at those pale fingers. She'd seen them too. How I'd never told her. Never told anyone. We sat there, 2 sisters, bound by a shared terror, piecing together the fragments of that haunted place. She described them exactly as I remembered, white, deliberate, bodiless, moving with a purpose that chilled us both. We traded details, our voices trembling, each word pulling us deeper into the past. The hands weren't just my nightmare. They were hers, too. I needed answers. I scoured the internet, digging into stories of haunted basements, of hands in the dark. What I found was worse than I expected. Others had seen hands, not white, but green, black-red, reaching from shadows, from under beds, from places where no hands should be. Some called them spirits, others demons, but all agreed they wanted something. To take, to pull, to claim. The basement we lived in had no history we knew of, no tragic deaths or buried secrets. But it didn't matter. Something lived there. Something that saw us, wanted us. My sister and I never spoke of it again, as if saying it aloud would summon them back. But the fear lingered a shadow that followed me into adulthood. I'd wake sometimes, heart racing, certain I'd seen a pale finger in the corner of my room. Was it real? Was it memory? I couldn't tell. The basement was gone, but its grip on me wasn't. I became a horror junkie, chasing stories that echoed my own, hoping to understand what we'd seen. What were those hands? I still ask myself, standing in the dark, feeling the weight of their gaze. Were they protecting us, warning us, or something far worse? The basement is long behind me, but the hands are still there in the quiet moments in the shadows, reaching. I don't know if they'll ever let me go, but I know one thing: they were real, and they saw me. Tros. It was the morning after Halloween, and the air felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. The campus streets, usually buzzing with students laughing and rushing to class, were eerily still, as if the revelry of the night before had drained the life from them. I was a freshman, barely 19, scrambling to make it to my chemistry lab after oversleeping. The clock mocked me, 9:45 a.m., and the buses had stopped running. My dorm was a 15-minute walk from campus, and with every step, the cold November air bit into my skin, sharp and unrelenting. My breath fogged in front of me, curling like a ghost in the morning chill. I was alone, or so I thought, until I saw him. A tall figure stood motionless on the sidewalk, his silhouette cutting through the gray dawn like a knife. He wore a scream Ghostface costume, the black robe pooling at his feet, the white mask gleaming under the weak sunlight. It wasn't just the costume that made my stomach twist. It was Halloween yesterday, so why was he still dressed like that? And why was he staring so intently at an old homeless man, curled up on a nearby bench, wrapped in a tattered blanket? The man on the bench looked frail, his face hidden, his body trembling slightly, as if sensing the weight of that gaze. I froze, my sneakers glued to the pavement. my heart thudding in my chest. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier now and thick with an unspoken threat, and my instincts screamed at me to keep moving, to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. My eyes locked onto the ghost face figure, and as if he felt my stare, he turned his head. The mask's hollow eyes met mine, and a shiver ran down my spine, cold as ice water. It wasn't just a costume. It was the way he stood, too still, too deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were sinking into the ground. Keep walking, I told myself. Just get to campus. But every step felt like wading through molasses, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, his gaze burning into my back. I glanced over my shoulder, and he was still there, unmoving, his head tilted slightly, as if studying me. The homeless man hadn't stirred his blanket now, a lifeless heap. My mind raced. Had he seen me looking? Was he coming for me next? I quickened my pace, the uphill path to campus stretching endlessly before me. The trees lining the street, bare and skeletal, seemed to whisper warnings as the wind rustled through them. I told myself it was nothing, just a prankster who hadn't let go of Halloween. But the memory of that mask haunted me. Its exaggerated scream, frozen in white plastic, felt like a mockery of fear itself. I kept looking back, each glance a pulse of dread, expecting to see him following me. But he didn't move. He just stood there, staring, his presence a weight that pressed against my chest. By the time I reached the campus gates, my breath was ragged, my palms sweaty despite the cold. I turned into a last time, and my heart stopped. The bench was empty. The homeless man was gone, and so was the ghost face figure. It was as if the street had swallowed them whole. I stood there, my mind spiraling, trying to make sense of it. How could two people vanish in seconds? The street was open. No alleys, no corners to duck into. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, the screen blurring as my eyes darted around, half expecting that mask to appear from behind a tree. "You're late for lab," I reminded myself, clinging to the normalcy of the thought. But it didn't help. The world felt tilted, like reality had cracked open, just enough to let something sinister slip through. I hurried into the science building, the fluorescent lights and chatter of students, a weak shield against the unease gnawing at my gut. I couldn't focus during the lab, my hands shaking as I measured chemicals, my mind replaying that empty bench, that mask, that impossible disappearance. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions, mixing solutions, scribbling notes, but my thoughts were trapped on that street, on the ghost face figure, and the homeless man who vanished like smoke. By evening, I was back in my dorm, the walls too thin, the air too still. My roommate, still groggy from his own post-Halloween exhaustion, noticed my silence. "You okay?" he asked, his voice casual, but laced with concern. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy, so I just nodded, forcing a smile that felt like a lie. But the truth was, I wasn't okay. I kept seeing that mask in my mind, its hollow eyes boring into me, and the empty bench where the homeless man had been. What happened to him? The question clawed at me, relentless like a splinter. I couldn't pull out. Over the next few days, I tried to piece it together. I asked around campus, hoping someone else had seen something. A few students mentioned the homeless man, a familiar figure who often slept on that bench, his blanket a patchwork of faded colors. They said the police had picked him up for disturbing the peace, but their words rang hollow. I'd seen him that morning, curled up defenseless, not disturbing anything. And the police, they wouldn't have come and gone that fast, not without lights or sirens. Besides, no one mentioned the ghost face figure. It was like he existed only for me, a private nightmare carved into my memory. I stopped walking that route to campus, taking longer paths through crowded streets, but the feeling of being watched never left me. At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the dorm's ceiling, wondering if I'd imagined it all. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. One night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through local news sites, searching for anything about a missing homeless man or a strange figure in a costume. Nothing. The absence of answers was worse than the fear itself. It made me doubt my own sanity. I started noticing things, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, a faint chill in the air, even when the heater was on. Once, while walking back from a late study session, I thought I saw a flash of white in the distance, like a mask catching the streetlight. I ran the rest of the way, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. "You're paranoid," I told myself, but the fear was real, a living thing that coiled around my thoughts. Weeks later, I overheard a conversation in the cafeteria. Two students were talking about the homeless man, saying he hadn't been seen since early November. One of them laughed, joking about ghosts cleaning up the streets, but the other looked uneasy, muttering about rumors of a figure in a mask lurking around campus. My blood ran cold. I wanted to ask them more, but my tongue felt heavy, my body rooted to the spot. That night, I dreamed of the ghost face figure standing at the foot of my bed, his mask glowing in the dark, his head tilted, as if waiting for me to speak. I woke up, gasping. The room too quiet, the air too cold. Halloween used to be my favorite holiday, a time for costumes and laughter, but now it's tainted. Every October, I feel that same chill, that same weight of being watched. I don't walk alone at dawn anymore, and I avoid benches on quiet streets. But no matter how far I go, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, waiting, his hollow eyes searching for me in the morning mist.